Good afternoon. How's everyone doing so far? All right. Well, nice conference is coming to a close soon, but we're not going to stop just yet. We have a phenomenal panel that's about to do the closing before we head over to the CAE designation ceremony. So without much further ado, I want to bring Maria Flynn and Princess Young to the stage.
Hello, everyone. Have you all been in Dallas long enough to say howdy? Did you all have enough barbecue that your hair still smells like it from last night? That's a sign of good food. Okay, and real quick, I have to do one last activity because there's educators in the room. There's hopefully people. I don't want y'all to be stuffy because we're almost at the end of this amazing journey of this conference. On the count of 3, I want you to yell your first name at the stage, okay? Just your first name. If you want to make up your name, it's fine. But I would say, Princess, and that is my real name. It's not my cyber ninja name, okay? It's legit. All right, on the count of 3, yell your first name. 1, 2, 3. Good group.
That's great.
Yeah. Nice to meet you. Oh, yeah, okay, yes. I feel like the bar was kind of low for that applause, but okay, I'm proud of you guys. We'll ask some harder questions later. But now y'all are on a first name basis with Maria and myself, and we're so excited for this conversation today because my last activity I need y'all to do, we're gonna do a quick hand poll. Can you raise your hand if you do not know the organization Jobs for the Future? It's okay, it's a safe space, no worries. Okay. So we've got some educating to do. We have a good conversation ready to happen. All right, last housekeeping item before I get to introduce the lovely Maria and have this conversation with her today. We want to actually hear from you all about halfway through the session. So if Maria says something that strikes you as interesting, if you have more questions about her organization or a topic that we touch on, I want you to write down the question, and we have microphones situated throughout the room. And we're going to have a stop and say, all right, let's take some questions. And then I want you to offer those questions up to Maria or myself if you happen to have one, my favorite Disney movie, whatever tickles your fancy. But please do keep it a question and let Maria give her amazing sage advice from her amazing experiences. So with that, I would like to introduce the amazing Maria Flynn. She is the president and CEO of Jobs for the Future, or JFF, which we might refer to it a few times throughout the session. And she's actually been president and CEO for over 7.5 years, and with JFF any longer. So I think it's a pretty good relationship that you have.
That's right.
And oh yeah, let's clap for that. Okay, yeah. That's amazing. And it really inspired me because she's doing incredible work. Her organization is really evolving and impacting conversations that affect everyone in this room, right? She is talking about how do we make equitable job opportunities and equitable economics for our country. And that's not always an easy conversation, I imagine. But we're gonna hear more from her today. And she also has over 300 people on her staff in over 45 countries. So, hey, you probably live in one of those. Dang it, I said that every time. I tried, even on the practice call. I wish. I'm manifesting for you.
Maybe that's
I'm
next.
manifesting for you. So yes, 46 states. So with that, we have some amazing questions ready for her today. A big thank you to Rodney Peterson from NIST and NICE for helping us compile these amazing questions, and please write yours down. So I've got my baseline question for you today, Maria. Your organization's name, Jobs for the Future, it's really intriguing and it sounds like a really exciting mission with a North Star that you should be so proud of. Can you tell us more about yourself and what your organization does specifically?
Sure. Thank you, Princess. Yeah. It's great to be here with all of you. Thank you for having me. So as Princess said, Jobs for the Future, we have been around just over 40 years. We are a national nonprofit organization, and I think to set some context, how you can think about us is think of us as a resource for you. So we are an intermediary organization where we help to build the capacity of federal, state, and local leaders to drive the transformation of the education and workforce systems in the United States, with the overall goal of achieving equitable economic advancement for all. So that's our mission, and it has been for over 40 years. We were founded back in 1983 when one of our earliest clients was a young governor of Arkansas named Bill Clinton. And at that time, Jobs for the Future was working with Governor Clinton and his team to really help industry in Arkansas, particularly at that time the manufacturing industry, really help the workers in the state keep pace with the changes that were happening in industry, right? So if we fast forward then 40 years, right, we're at a similar moment in time, right, where technology and AI is continuing to drive transformation and our systems are still trying to keep pace. So about a year or so ago, we launched a bold North Star, sort of in conjunction with our 40th anniversary and looking ahead to our 50th, which is that in 10 years, we want to see 75 million US workers who face systemic barriers to advancement working in quality jobs. And the way that we see that is it's basically doubling the number of those workers who are working in quality jobs currently. And broadly speaking, we're talking about three large populations of workers: workers of color, women, individuals who don't have four-year college degrees, and individuals who have been impacted by the criminal justice system. And we really work everywhere from kind of middle school up through adult workers and across the education, the workforce, the employer community, and increasingly also with entrepreneurs and investors as well.
I love that. I mean, I have a follow-up question about what you do in your spare time and your fun time, because that is a whole lot of change making. We're going to quickly divert the conversation and say, I love your scarf. Would you mind moving it away off the mic just a little bit?
Sorry.
There we go. There we go. Can we direct everyone to how wonderful that scarf is? Yeah. So kind of using all of that as a jumping off point, what I like that you mentioned is with your North Star, you're being proactive on where we want to see jobs and workforce development going. So I kind of wanted to mention your mission aligns so much with the nice community's efforts to build a diverse and skilled workforce. So just curious, how does your organization mission, you kind of started to talk about it, but how do they help people in the room who are seeking to increase participation, particularly of the underserved communities that you are also looking at?
Yes, so we're doing that in a number of ways, and I think looking at kind of the area of, I guess we could maybe use the broad definition of digital jobs is how we think of it, and we think of cyber as a big piece of that. I encourage you to, for a lot of these things we're going to mention, to use our website as a resource, which is very simple, jff.org. We have a whole section on there about our work in the digital jobs space. And so I'll mention three things that we are focused on. So one is we've put out a comprehensive framework around how to enhance equity and inclusion in the digital jobs field. And there are a number of components about that, many of which are very similar to the topics that you've been talking about here over the past couple of days, which is terrific. So building more inclusive, high quality, transparent education and career pathways, working with employers to change their policies and their practices to really help them think through how to change their hiring behavior, for example, really helping communities look at the data around hiring needs and kind of that supply and demand alignment. So our digital job strategy, I think, is really relevant to everyone here. The second, also, I know you've talked about this here and you've heard from some great kind of firsthand stories from workers. We do a lot of work with Google and CompTIA and others to help integrate the credentials that they have or their certificates, and we've probably worked with many of you in the room, help them integrate them into existing IT pathways or programs, both at the community college level, and as well as community-based organizations. So really making sure that these offerings aren't just standalone, but are integrated into more comprehensive approaches, and that they are accessible broadly. And then the third is we have a Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning, and cyber is one of the fields that we are focused on in terms of expanding registered apprenticeships and doing that in an equitable way as well.
I love the tangible examples, and it's just a small piece of what you're working on, I'm sure. I wanted to also ask a little bit about the Department of Commerce's Good Jobs Challenge, because I know you're involved in that. And reading from your website as well, I kind of got the idea that maybe not all jobs are created equal. Yeah. And so in your mind, and for the organization, how do you define good jobs, and what is JFF doing in support of that national program?
Sure, definitely. So as many of you probably know, we're at this, what I would call like a historic moment in time, at least of our generation, in terms of federal dollars that are flowing to communities around job creation and the creation of good jobs. So if you look across both the infrastructure bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, and others, you know, lots of dollars that are flowing. The CHIPS Act is another. We, as Princess said, we're running the community of practice for the Department of Commerce Good Jobs Challenge grantees. These are 32 communities around the country that received pretty sizable grants about 2 years ago. And our role in this is that we are really helping them with technical assistance, facilitating peer learning and convenings for them, matching them up with subject matter experts around the country, and really helping them kind of put their plans into action, so to speak. When we think of quality jobs, and again, I encourage you to look at our framework on our website, we think of it as having 4 main components. So one, obviously, is around compensation and benefits. But I think, and as someone who spent the first half of my career at the U.S. Department of Labor, I think a lot of times when people hear good jobs, they kind of only think about the compensation. Mm-hmm. And obviously, it's an important point, but we think there are 3 other important facets as well. So one is worker autonomy, structure, and Rodney was telling me, you heard from someone who was talking about they liked kind of moving into the cyber field because it gave them more work-life balance, right? So having that type of like structure and reliability in your job, thinking about advancement opportunities, so acknowledging that, you know, we all have to kind of start at that like first ladder at some point in our lives, right? Acknowledging that there is that starting place, but making sure employers and communities are thinking about what are those advancement pathways. So we have examples of that, and also examples of how obviously employers have a key role to play in this, but it's not just employers. There's a role for community colleges, community-based organizations, workforce boards, and really thinking through how do we get folks on a path to quality jobs, how do we get more quality jobs created, and how do we ensure that the training that we're providing are aligned to those opportunities.
That's amazing. We met with Rodney and NICE last week and asked a little bit more about what is this community, the NICE community, facing challenge-wise. And one item that got brought up was the difficulty in fulfilling roles, specifically the early career jobs. And I mean, I'll even be honest, at Southwest Airlines, where I work, we also struggle with that, where there is more amazing students and amazing talent coming from a boot camp opportunity, from real world experience, or from college, but we don't have the entry-level jobs to align with that. So I was just curious, have you seen any creative solutioning or any advice for the community on how to solve that problem, where many of them might be educating, you know, the workforce of tomorrow, but it can be a bit of a downer when you say, but there may not be a job immediately. What can we do there?
Yes, one thought would be, and you know, this is some work that we've done over time in the healthcare industry, is are there ways to break down what is that kind of closest to the entry-level job into different components. So can you kind of break that job or divide those tasks maybe into 2 different roles, providing more of a entry-level role and then an advancement opportunity. So I think looking to see how you can kind of deconstruct and reinvent some of this.
I love that.
I would say broadly speaking though, like something that I have my eye on, because I've heard this now from several different industries, is this concern that advances in AI are starting to really kind of take away some of those entry-level jobs across industry. And I heard someone from the OECD say recently, which really I felt was like a very stark statement. He said, I think that basically the market is going to drop out for early college grads, basically. And as someone who has a daughter who's 20, I was like, oh, that's terrible. I don't want to hear that. But I've
Get
heard,
the ice cream now.
That's
Be
right.
ready for that. Supportive conversation.
So but I've heard that recently from very different fields. I've heard it from the chair of the board of a large law firm who was saying that instead of hiring kind of first-year legal associates and lawyers, they're hiring technologists, and kind of raising the question of then what does it mean to be like, what's your path to partner in a law firm if you don't have that kind of role right out of law school? And then similarly, I heard in a very different situation, a reporter at our local NPR station was saying that when they first started as a reporter, a big part of their job was translating and transcripting their boss's interviews. And by doing that transcription, that's how they learned how to structure good interviews, craft good questions. And now, all of that is automated. So this question of then how do you become, how do you kind of learn the craft of being a reporter if you're not doing that, kind of very kind of step 1 work. So lots to think about across the board.
I'm glad that you hit on AI, so maybe we'll keep moving forward then. So there's been a lot of awesome AI conversation today, and there might be some questions in the room that want to follow up on that as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, in 2022, you wrote a commentary entitled, "College is one way to get ahead. It shouldn't be the only one." Higher education is arguably on the precipice of change given the rising student debt, declining enrollment, and the fact that colleges and universities are closing at the rate of 1 week per a recent Washington Post article. So given the increased emphasis on skills-based hiring that often emphasizes hire based on skills and not the degree, which I feel like I've been seeing that shift for many years too, what do you see as the future of higher education, especially from your vantage point, which is so unique to me, so I'm interested.
So I think higher education ideally shifts into a construct that is much more focused on lifelong learning, right? So moving away from what I feel is, a lot of people think is the norm, but actually isn't when you look at the data, right? This norm of like, oh, kids go off to college from 18 to 22 and then like move on. So, I think first let's like recognizing that I think it's only 35% of adults in the US workforce today have a 4-year degree. So it's not even the majority of workers. And I think that what we are seeing, and I think we're going to continue to see, is that Gen Z, kind of the new generation coming up, they want something different, right? They want to get right into the workforce. They want solutions that are more flexible and more nimble. And so I think that, as Princess was saying, right, this confluence of so many different factors, cost and, some of the culture wars around higher ed and what Gen Z is asking for and even what employers are asking for, right? We're seeing more and more large companies who are frustrated with trying to partner with higher ed and instead are building their own solutions, right? They're building their own training programs. They're building their own, in some instances, even, kind of like educational, like their own like programs and institutions almost. So I think we are at a point of a pretty big shift on the horizon. And so my guess is that, in the next 5 to 10 years, we will continue to see a lot of changes. And I think that demand is going to come from multiple parts of the ecosystem. And I think, I guess also what I'll say is it's not like an either or. I also think, right, you want to build pathways that can enable someone to maybe start with a certification that gets them that first job and then gives them affordable ways to continue into 2-year degrees, 4-year degrees, and beyond. But I think we want to really make it clear to what the value of those degrees and certificates and credentials are, what the pathways are to get to them, and really have a strong pulse on what employers are seeking.
I want to call you my workforce development oracle. I'm like, what does Maria see in the future? So no crystal ball needed. It's believed that we're in the midst of the 4th industrial revolution, described as a phase of digitization that's introducing disruptive trends, including the rise of data and connectivity, analytics, human-machine interaction, and improvements in robotics. Given that rapid change and the disruption caused by those technologies, do you have any advice that you would give to the following 3 audiences: employers of the cyber workforce, learners, that includes students, job seekers, and employees, and then education and training providers? Basically all of these lovely people in the room.
Yeah, so starting with employers, so we have an impact employer model that I encourage you to check out on our website, which really lays out 6 different ways that employers can really center employees at the heart of their business in conjunction with strong business outcomes, right? So again, this isn't an either or scenario, but ways that we can embed skills-based hiring, ethical offboarding, total reward strategies, advancement opportunities in business. And that can be whether you're government. We're seeing great advances in government around skills-based hiring, private sector, nonprofit across the board. I think with cyber, where there is an opportunity is to continue to lean in to skills-based hiring. So when my team looked at job postings for cyber, this is like a June of last year, I want to say, 63% of the postings still said that they required a 4-year degree. So, how can we kind of be looking at that? When do we feel like that's really a requirement? When is it just kind of like habit or like the easy way out? And so again, really starting to break down, what are the skills, the competencies that you're looking for, and how to build that into not just your job postings, but your hiring practice. There's a report that's getting a lot of traction from Harvard Business School and Burning Glass Institute that shows that employers are saying the right thing, but the hiring isn't actually happening. And so I just want to acknowledge, like for me, I worry that like starts to throw like cold water on something that is really in the very early innings. And so I think we need to give this some time to scale, but in order to do that, like we have to be moving beyond kind of just changing the job description is a great thing, but how do we start changing the process and kind of changing the mindset and the behaviors of hiring managers?
Amazing. All right, friends, it's that time. We're at about the halfway mark. Is there any questions in the room so far? If there is, you can hit any of the mics and just go walk to one if you'd like. We have someone standing. Awesome.
Hi, thanks very much. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from America. Hence the question. I'm interested to understand 2 things. How can we take this to a global scale? How do you work with other countries and organizations? In particular, aligning to the World Economic Forum and the WEF model, which I guess does address some of the questions, but I'm really keen to understand how we can get mobility working around the world, not just nationally.
Yes, I think it's a great question. We at JFF are just kind of like dipping our toe in the international waters, so to speak, so I can give a couple of those examples. But I do think like between WEF, like some work that the UN is doing, it's heartening to see some common themes starting to develop around skills, also around learning and employment records, right? So kind of you think of them as digital wallets that folks can carry with them really throughout their education and workforce experience. So rather than your data being owned by your employer, it could be a portable wallet. And that's something that has a lot of international traction right now. I think another one is around climate. So we just had a team in India as part of some work that we're doing for Ares, the private equity firm's foundation, doing some joint work in the climate space. I've had some engagement with the COP conference and other things. But I do think that, and then where I see a lot of this momentum being driven from too, is by large companies like JP Morgan Chase, Walmart, Salesforce, others that are located multinationally and are kind of seeing common needs and common opportunities for new types of solutions. And then the last thing I would say is also in the entrepreneurial space. So we at JFF, we do have an innovation lab called JFF Labs, and we have a impact investing arm called JFF Ventures. And so I think we're just seeing a lot of tech solutions emerging from all over the world that are really sitting at this intersection of education and work.
I think I accidentally manifested it by saying what countries you were
That's
in.
right.
I was like, there you go. All right, anyone else for the moment? All right, I got a few more questions I can throw at her, so I'll open the floor up one more time before the end. I actually had a little bit of a different question for you. I know there's been a lot of conversation with this community and even just objectively around the value of apprenticeships and internships, creating pathways into full-time work. I was just curious, do you think that those are most effective? Should we be targeting the full-time job more so? Because you got me just thinking about recreating and breaking down an actual full-time job. So I was just wondering, do you think internships and apprenticeships maybe are like temporary fixes, but like what's the next level maybe?
I think that's a great question.
So I'm sorry, I did not
yeah.
brief her on that
I think
one,
it's
so I
good.
went rogue. I went rogue, everybody.
I definitely think that this kind of first goal is expanding opportunities for paid internships and work-based learning. Ideally starting in high school, moving into post-secondary and beyond. So I think we're seeing that happen in spots, right? Like kind of clusters of innovation, but it hasn't been happening at scale yet. I would call out some states like Delaware, Tennessee, a few others that are really starting to offer these opportunities at scale at the high school level, which is terrific. But I think to your point, and again, it's my sense that this is what kind of the next generation coming into the labor force wants, are more kind of, put work in the forefront and kind of build the training off of that, right? So kind of working full time and either getting actual credit for the work that you're doing, right? So how can you be articulating and certifying skill attainment through the course of your actual job and use that as an advancement opportunity. There are some really interesting technology platforms. Adept ID is one that we're investing in. There's a lot of others that are running kind of internal skills matching systems for companies that can show like, oh, we see that like Maria has X and Y skill, like she could be well qualified for this job in this other part of your company. So I think like using AI and advancing technologies as ways to build some of that internal advancement infrastructure I think would be interesting. And then using employer like tuition reimbursement and some more of those both like traditional approaches as well as some of the new things we're seeing like through companies like Guild or InStride or others that have like employer-centered platforms, like using them like as almost an add-on to the job.
I love that. You got my brain firing, so I'm going to go rogue again and just ask a little bit about, you talked about kind of what constitutes a good job. It got me thinking, and I think we started seeing this a lot during COVID or as a result, the ideas of burnout and then job retention. So I was just curious, does JFF also look at not only helping get those opportunities to light and have equitable opportunity to get people in jobs, but what should we be looking at to make sure we retain our people in those jobs? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do think mapping out like very clear, transparent advancement opportunities is one. Folks want to see what is possible for them. And I think what we're seeing in a lot of this in the retail sector and some others is we're seeing Amazon do this, Walmart, others. It may not be advancement within your company, but even showing them like what are the advancement opportunities in adjacent industries, right? So kind of proactively looking at that, and even in some cases, employers are financing some of that. And to me, that's something that like 20 years ago, we never would have heard of, right? I think employers just like were convinced that people were going to stay with them forever, even though the data wasn't telling them that. And now I think folks are much more open to what the broader opportunities are.
I love that. In terms of some of the underserved communities that you really have goals to help build up and make jobs available, I was just curious, are there any specific demographics you see or age ranges? And what do they want in a job? Or they've gone through much of their life probably not feeling like a good job could be attainable. How do you change the narrative for them?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of factors, right? So a lot of people talk about, they want to be able to see someone like themselves in some of these jobs, right? So having those positive role models, whether in the community, on social media, like other ways to really help folks see what's possible. Myself, I read a book probably 10 years ago now, and I realized that the woman who wrote the book and I are probably the exact same age, and her story was all about like her career out in Silicon Valley in tech. And for me, I was thinking like, I wouldn't even have known like what that was, right, at the time, right? And so if you just extrapolate that out to like, how can you really help young people find, what inspires them and what brings them joy? Like, how do you help them finance that path? And then how do you help them flourish along that pathway? So find, finance, and flourish. And when we think about flourish, I think too often we see, if you take maybe coding programs that are designed for women, for example, you get someone through the program, you put them in an employer, and then they leave because it's not an inclusive environment, right? So we have to also be thinking about what supports, what changes need to be in place post-hire. And I think maybe the past 10 years we've been focused more on the training, getting folks trained, getting them like to that point of hire. And I think the conversation now has to evolve more into like what happens after the point of hire, and how do we focus on retention? How do we think about wraparound supports? How do we think about like employee resource groups and other things that you can put in place?
Amazing. I know there's been some sessions that have talked about DE&I initiatives, and I don't want to commingle the two in terms of underserved communities and the demographics, but one that continues to strike me as a really exciting opportunity is around neurodivergence and that community, and how we can be supportive of them and make sure that they know that there are opportunities for them as well. Is JFF also looking at them and this group as an underserved community? And any advice for people in the room who it might be their first rodeo? Oh, that was a Texas line. I didn't even mean to do that. But I think it can be an intimidating space. I think it can be intimidating when you're already trying to build your workforce to meet baseline, and then you're also trying to be creative and serve communities that are just waiting to be tapped for talent. Can you speak to neurodivergent communities or anything aligned that resonates with you?
Yeah, so we are definitely looking at neurodiversity, at pathways for those individuals, and then more broadly looking at just accessibility and strategies for individuals with disabilities across the board. I would say the most focused work we're doing in that area right now is around registered apprenticeship. So it's part of a center of innovation that we're running for the U.S. Department of Labor right now. And when I was at the U.S. Department of Labor, that's where I first got my first exposure really to programs focused on neurodivergent individuals. And it was an internship program that the department ran, and we had one of the interns in our office. And it really opened my eyes to what was possible and the immense skills that this individual brought to the table. We ended up hiring them full time. And so I think it's, look for programs like that where you can get exposure, where you can learn about the amazing talent that is out there, and the really unique skills that they can bring to really drive your impact.
I love that. And not to toot our own horn, but Southwest Airlines is in at least our second year of our neurodiversity internship program. And so we actually have hired students from across the country, from all different areas and levels of college, and we have them placed all throughout the company. So we have several in our technology department, one in our cybersecurity team, and it's just amazing. And to follow up on what you said too, I think we had our hiring managers and our recruiters trained up so that we interviewed properly and equitably in that way. We also had a coach that could work not only with those students, but with us. So we made sure that if anything was being missed in translation, we were able to make sure that we could get back on the same page. And then they received the performance reviews and everything just as they would. And I'm happy to say our intern came back. So we did a good job, enough that he wanted to come back and spend a second summer with us. But you can do it, and it is well worth it, I feel like. So do we have any questions in the room? I'm going to do a pulse check. Yeah! Oops.
All right, make sure everyone's awake before I ask.
My grandpa would say, I dropped my contacts.
Well, I'm just going to hold it.
Own it, own it.
All right, so my name is Dr. Orozco, and I work for a cybersecurity company called Breakpoint Labs. And so our contracts range from federal to commercial. So I wanted to backtrack a little bit about your comment about skills-based learning. And while I agree with that, some of the solicitations, so a majority of our work supports the DoD and cybersecurity. And when the solicitations drop, that's kind of those educational requirements are required. And so unfortunately, we have to, in order to be compliant with the contract, we have to fill that. What type of collaboration or any conversations may be happening with maybe the DoD specifically to relax some of those educational requirements?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, because we run into the same thing. We do contracting work mainly for education, labor, and commerce, and run into the exact same thing. So not just JFF, but our partners at Opportunity at Work, and a lot of folks in this space are doing a lot of work with the administration. I feel the right things are being said kind of at the executive order level, where actually both the Trump administration and the Biden administration have had executive orders encouraging federal agencies to move to skills-based hiring, both for their employees and for their contractors. But I think to your point, how that has filtered to the different agencies is a bit mixed. So it is definitely something we're looking at, including at defense. And I'll give an example from JFF folks so you can kind of understand where this becomes the barrier. So we have this is a very specific example. We have someone on staff who arguably is one of the best workforce policy folks in the country, worked for the House and the Senate and different organizations for over 30 years. In this case, she doesn't have a master's degree, but every labor solicitation that comes out says that the project director has to have a master's degree. So so we were not able to even bid them on that at work. But if you extrapolate that to all the positions that require master's, bachelor's degrees, and so on, it really is a significant barrier.
Thank you for the question. Oh, yay, we have another one. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon. John Haas with Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and Center for the Future, where we are trying to help create these jobs and sustain them in your next door neighbor state close by in Arizona. And one of the challenges we see, this is a hot mic, is that funding to help create this, although everyone says we want workforce, we want people, yes, go out and do it. Oh, but we don't have any nickels. So what is your way? Of course, the great state of Texas is wealthy, but how do you find and reach out for that kind of funding to help make this possible?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think one, I would say like shortfall in a lot of the federal funds that I mentioned before across CHIPS and infrastructure and so on, a lot of it theoretically can be used for workforce, but it's not specified that way, right? So I think there's kind of an imbalance in the dollars that are flowing right now, unfortunately. And then I think that some funders get kind of turned off or say no because they say, oh, what's the problem, right? We have the lowest unemployment rate we've had in 2 generations. There's no workforce issue here. And so what I have found is really helping them kind of dig below that headline of low unemployment and really help them see, where there are skills misalignment, where there are equity gaps, really helping to kind of paint the picture for the gaps that exist now and then extrapolating that out into the future. But I do think there are definite strong interest among philanthropy, corporate, and I think I love that NIST is convening this because I think it's a very forward looking agenda, but I would argue that some federal agencies need to catch up a bit. But I would love to talk more.
All right, we're almost out of time, so I've got 2 last questions, and then you can also tug on Maria's ear afterwards if you'd like. But I just wanted to quickly ask as well, when you're not solving the problems of the world and you get a moment to yourself, whether it's work-related or not, what are you reading or listening to these days?
Oh, so I am known for, outside of work, I try not to take on anything too heavy. So
Smart.
I
You're
read
like the recent white paper
I read
I've
a
read,
lot of detective fiction, basically,
Same.
outside of work. I'm working my way through the Louise Penny Detective Gamache novels, which I think are very fun, and there's about 21 of them, and I think I'm on 19, so I'm gonna be sad when they end. But yeah, I try not to tackle anything too
I love that.
heavy.
Please post on LinkedIn when you're done with the series. I'm going to root you on. That's amazing. All right. So really my last question is just this. Are there any final parting thoughts or takeaways you'd like to leave us with? Perhaps any challenges or homework that we can take back to our organizations? And then also please plug your amazing summit that's coming up this summer.
Definitely. I'll start there. So we have an annual summit each year called Horizons. This year it's July 22nd and 23rd in Washington, D.C. And it's really, I like to think, the place to be around future of work conversations that span education and workforce. So I encourage you to join us there. I think in terms of challenges, I think one is, to just think about how, from your seats, how you can be the most proactive and be the most bold, right? Because I would say those are the things that drive me in my work. The reason I came to JFF initially was I felt it was a good place to be proactive and to push the envelope. And I think we can all do that in different ways, no matter what our organization is like. So, be the one to ask the hard questions, be the one to advocate for the crazy change. Thinking about, I know the theme here has been around ecosystem building, really think about how you can develop partnerships in new ways. I think to me that is the future, is going to be around partnerships, public-private partnerships, partnerships between traditional systems and innovators or disruptors who are coming from the outside. I don't think any of us have the answer, and in order to see the impact that we all want to see, it's going to take that connectivity and that creativity.
Awesome. I hope you all got some awesome nugget or 10 from today's conversation. Thank you, Maria, for being with us today and all the amazing work you're doing. Keep doing it.
Yeah.
Please remember to go to jff.org so you can learn more about the summit, more about the important work that she's doing, how you can maybe partner with her. And I'll just close out by saying, as a graduate of a CAE institution many years ago, I will not give my graduation date. I just have to say thank you for all the important work that you all do to inspire the next generation and make a workforce that we all want to be a part of and are proud of. Thank you.
Thank you.